I don't want to do a retrospective, actually, because we've kind of done that in a way in some of the sessions this morning, and we've covered a lot of the ground, and I think the audience maybe is familiar with some of the progress that's been made. So I'd rather that we had a future focus on improving the investment, growth, competitiveness landscape in Greece. And you're all old hands, so I'm sure you can do that. So yeah, if you want to do a retrospective, which is obviously this is an institutional reflection rather than government or business, that's fine in a few points. But if you can also try to focus on the kind of issues as you see them, outstanding issues, and next steps really to take the momentum forward, that would be great. So Yannis, I'm turning first of all to you. Welcome.
Thank you, and I'm very glad to be here. Well, I was prepared for a retrospective, but I think it's more useful to look forward, although I was part of this journey from the first government of Greece, and it was a real impressive, stressful, but fruitful journey that bring Greece into a level that we are not talking anymore about recovery, we are talking about transformation. And transformation, it can come from several factors, taking into account the global economy and also the geopolitics of the region. So we are currently living in a stable macroeconomic environment. In Greece, there is stability. There is tax reforms and digital reforms that they have affected all the span of the enterprises and the citizens. So what we need to do, and I will finish with that, is three things. Capacity, capacity, capacity.
Okay. You can elaborate a bit more on that if you like, but we can also come back. But thanks so much for being focused. Over now to you, Yorios.
Well, for the sake of consistency with the title of our discussion, of our session, regarding the retrospective, I would say that the Tax and Customs Administration has played a key role in establishing fiscal stability, which was one of the major issues that could secure the economy's position, getting back to investment grade, and then so that's setting, let's just say, the scene for competitiveness, because without that, you cannot discuss about a competitive economy. But now we need to move from that on how we become predictable, outward-looking, how we attract long-term investment. And when it comes to the tax administration, the discussion is much more than tax rates. We all know that investors don't just look in low tax rates. Otherwise, no big investment would have happened in countries with medium or high tax rates. I think the question is, for an investor is how can I understand the rules? How can I do what I want to do, my business activity, without impediments? How do I comply without friction? And at the end of the day, how do I achieve tax certainty before I do an investment step? And this is these are the areas in which we're working intensively in the tax administration. We are steadily working towards data-driven tax administration, which means all obligations are digitally fulfilled, digital tax returns, pre-filling, continuous transaction control system, or My Data system, which has helped reduce our VAT gap from 30% approximately to 9%, so below the EU average. Then in the area of tax certainty, we have introduced an advanced ruling scheme which has made us align to international best practice, which means that a business before investing can ask a question how its investment plan is going to be treated tax-wise. So we don't wait for an audit to tell them that this is wrong. They know beforehand, and this is also public. We have a very efficient dispute resolution unit that examines almost 99% of requests and publishes its decisions, so people know how we think. Transparency is of paramount importance here. And then how we improve our digital services, how we bring more and more end-to-end digital services without friction, but at the same time, how we provide guidance to businesses on how to comply. And the fourth area, I would say, which is of a special importance in Greece, is customs. Greece is not just one of the 27 member states in terms of customs. We are the southeast gate of Europe. We have 116 inhabited islands. We are the definition of an archipel in international law. So how our customs operate, what facilitations we provide, how we invest in schemes, trusted trader schemes like authorized economic operators, free zones, warehousing. How do we give back the refunds in a timely and a predictable manner? All these are areas where if we succeed, then we can make a difference and be attractive without being soft. Tax administration does not need to be soft. It needs to be firm where we need to be firm, because this is the way that we secure, let's just say, healthy competition between businesses. The rule is applied, but at the same time, we can be friendly, we can be supportive, we can be predictive, we can provide information there. In a nutshell, this is what we are striving for in our tax and customs administration. And I think in our way, we have made a difference over the previous years in setting the scene for the Greek economy.
Absolutely, thank you. George.
John, if you allow me to start with a very brief retrospective, because
Yes, I don't want to prevent you saying
which
anything.
will take me to the point that you are looking at. So 10, 12 years ago, I was talking to a businessman, leading businessman, and he said, whatever you do in your business, you restructure, you get the best talent, you open markets, you raise productivity, you cannot change the macros. The macros were the great burden of the Greek economy, falling upon businesses, domestic and discouraging foreign investors. Now they've become the great advantage of the Greek economy. So I would start looking forward. One thing, retain the gains in terms of the macros. The Greek economy has been growing at 2% levels since 2021, when the Eurozone average is close to flat. The crisis has moved in the Eurozone or the fragility or the vulnerability from the periphery to the core. Greece has demonstrated the fastest reduction of public debt to GDP in the developed world. We need to sustain this path. We need to sustain primary budget surpluses. They're not just sustained, but they have become sustainable. And they've become sustainable because the structure of the economy is also changing. It is not just tax evasion, which with the efforts of Governor Pitsilis and his team we've closed the VAT gap.
Sorry, do you think they are sustainable at these levels, which have been above the actual target, the primary surpluses? Do you think they are sustainable over a longer term?
Well, we are close to 4.5 primary surplus. That might be too high, but the primary budget, significant primary budget surpluses are sustainable, as they have been sustained over the last few years. And they are sustainable. I'll give you one indication. Exports. We used to be a closed economy. Exports are now from 20% level to over 40%. And that's very significant. The composition of exports is we're not exporting olives or fruit. There's an increasing share of high value added, of manufacturing, of technological component. Competition. I'm happy enough to represent Greece at the OECD, and at the report that came out in the, there's an indicator, composite indicator, product market regulation index, which lumps together hundreds of qualitative indicators regarding market regulation, regarding state involvement in the economy, competition in terms of regulating competition, and regulation in terms of entry of new players in the market. Greece topped the charts of the OECD in terms of the improvement that took place between 2018 and 2023. And we were invited to present our record of achievement in front of 38 member states, 37 member states with the OECD. Now, this is something that refers to the past, but it needs to be sustained. And there is more ground to be reached because we have been performing among the leading countries in the OECD when it comes to the delta of improvement. So if you look at the distance covered over the last few years, Greece has been the fastest running country in terms of bridging the gaps from OECD and EU partners. But we're still lagging behind in a number of indicators, which is, on one hand, the structural features of the economy, for example, very small enterprises, which are a burden in terms of productivity, in terms of tax collection, in terms of overall competitiveness of the economy, and of course the legacies of the crisis, which have not been completely eradicated, despite the huge distance that has been covered. So we need to keep up the pace. We need to establish the kind of continuity and consistency that has been hard gained over the last few years. And we need to make sure that we don't go back. And we need to make sure that the levels of growth of investment that we have seen over the last few years, largely accelerated thanks to the RRF, but also thanks to the private investment that has been crowded in as a result of the RRF. Greece has posted an 83% growth in investment volume between 2019 and 2025. This is the highest rate of growth of investment volume in the entire European Union. We need to keep up along this track. We need to keep up with the transformation of the investment in terms of quality, in terms of participation of technology, in terms of higher value added. And all this is a constant effort. It is something that involves huge across-the-board transformations and improvements in the institutional environment in terms of affecting private sector incentives, and in terms of getting it right in terms of budgetary balance, in terms of extroversion of the economy, in terms of green transition of the economy happening at the same time with the digital transition. It was mentioned before, just to give a number, and it's a number that I like particularly. In 2020, there was this revolutionary digitization of the Greek economy. The total transactions on gov.gr in 2020 were 90 million. 2025, it's 2.7 billion transactions. This means that there's a whole breadth of investors and citizens and companies, small and large, that are doing their business much more efficiently, much faster, in a way that's much more conducive to productivity and the competitiveness of the Greek economy. These are things that are constantly to be pursued. It is not a battle that has been won. It is a constant struggle, and we need to keep on this track. And the signs, let me just finish with that, the signs are very good. There was a recent report by the OECD just a few weeks ago, the Digital Government Outlook, and Greece is above the OECD average in 5 out of 6 indicators that build the benchmark of the OECD. So we are doing well. We have set the standards for the attractiveness of the Greek economy. We need to keep up the effort.
Thank you very much, George. Colin, where do you see the opportunities to take things one step further, and where the gaps, do you think?
Thank you, Joan, and good afternoon, everybody. It is wonderful to be back here in this amazing venue, and I'd like to thank The Economist and Nectaria and her team, as always. It's lovely. I am going to start because, the title was retrospective, right? And given who I work for, I think I need to acknowledge as everybody has, the amazing progress that Greece has made over the past decade. Because it has been very hard won, and it has involved real pain for so many Greek people. And I don't think we should ever just kind of sweep that under the carpet. And not just because, these are people's lives we're talking about, but also to make it a bit more forward-looking. There are lots of other countries today that are finding themselves in difficult positions. And Greece is the example they can look to. So we have this concept called fiscal space, where I work. And it's not really about how much more can you borrow. It's more how difficult is it for you to get your public finances back on track. Is the adjustment that we think you need simple or doable compared to what you've done in the past? And when I look at Italy, France, the UK today, I see no fiscal space. Because to bring debt down, we need a fiscal transformation that we've never seen them do before. But that was true here 10 years ago. And actually, Greece is a shining example to other countries of how to bring that about, difficult and painful as it is. And when I talk to banks and investors now, I don't think Greece has any investment problem or perception problem with investors at all. Certainly not in terms of the capital. And you can see that in the FDI numbers. You can see that in growth that's more investment-driven than consumption-driven. It's a great success story. But there are a couple of areas that I just wanted to highlight kind of going forwards to turn it into the forward-looking aspect. The first is clearly RRF has been a very big deal here. But RRF was always a bridge, not a destination. So the challenge going forwards is going to be how does Greece cope with, in all likelihood, a slightly slower pace of investment, and certainly FDI rates that are probably a bit below that peak we saw in 2022. And I think the really important thing here is that the Greek government has bought itself time, and it has these primary surpluses, which are actually a little bit more than are required under the agreements with the European institutions. The one area I would call out, where maybe if you were going to try and spend some of that space, it probably isn't capital in a kind of economic investment sense at all. Because the reason we care about investment and capital is, we care about growth. And it's often kind of lumped into productivity. But actually, the really big factor of production I still think will matter is labor. So if I was a forward-looking economist, which I try to be right now, I think there's a lot more that the Greek government could do in terms of the labor force. Participation rates here are still about 5 percentage points below the EU average. Female participation in the workforce is still very low. There are issues around childcare, elder care. There are issues around taxation and social contributions, particularly for less formal work. And actually, given that the investment flows look healthy, given that the capital is coming, I don't subscribe to the idea that we don't need people because AI and Amica is going to do everything for us. Sorry, Amica. I think we're still going to need people. And having an active, engaged workforce that we are reskilling and training to meet those challenges, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, just to pursue that point, obviously that's something that can't be done overnight, addressing that problem, the kind of the demographic issues, the participation rates and so on, and actually getting the percentage of, for example, female labor into the workforce requires actually a lot of state investment in, it's women in Greece who are mainly carrying the burden of bringing up children, looking after the elderly and infirm and so on. You can't change that overnight. So what are the policies that can actually bring some rewards relatively quickly, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think you've answered the question for me. And I appreciate this is a divisive topic. It's a bit like pineapple on pizza. You either hate it or you love it. But I think it's more about setting an agenda for probably the next government after the elections, because it will take 4 or 5 years to embed some of these policies and see the fruit. But I genuinely think making early childcare cheaper and providing better access to that would help a lot. We've seen that go a long way in other countries. There are still issues around the nature of taxation and how much of it is individual-based versus household-based. There are clearly issues around social care for the elderly. These are difficult things that need to be grappled with, but again, this is a government that now has a track record, and a track record of delivering So even though this would be an ambitious agenda where we've seen its fall down and these kind of policies stutter in other parts of the world, Greece has credibility now. And I think investors would believe promises from this government that it was actually going to get to grips with this issue, which is one of the areas where there's been a little bit less progress than some of the other areas of reform.
Yeah, so as someone said earlier, 4 more years needed, and maybe constitutional, the constitutional change is obviously a very big thing and on the agenda of whoever wins the next election. Well, it might not be on the agenda, for some, but anyway, we won't get into all that. But I wanted to give you the chance, Ioannis, because you were very short in your initial remarks to come in now. I've been asked to try, because we were meant to finish for lunch at 2 o'clock. I've been asked to try and finish before past, so a few more minutes though I think we can take. So I guess the question is, I don't want to say there were easy wins because none of those wins were easy at all. They were incredibly painful and difficult and so on. But looking forward, are they harder now or easier? What more gains can be made in all the areas that you're involved in whether it's digitization, whether it's still further tax reform, but how do you see it?
Yes, allow me also to elaborate very quickly on what I said before on capacity. I mean, the question for Europe, the question for Greece is about competitiveness. And my view is that Greece should expand in building capacity, building production, building hard assets.
Okay.
We have invested a lot also in soft assets, let's say. But when it comes to resilience, it's about hard assets. So we need more infrastructure, we need more critical infrastructure, we need more interconnections, we need a better electrical grid, we need better ports. Thanks God we have a lot of roads, so it's not an issue. We need transportation, we need networks in general. And this is capacity, and this is resilience as well, because don't forget that if we go 20 years back, summer 2006, in Greece it was a party, a big party. Everybody was celebrating, and disaster was just around the corner. So, of course, nobody can foresee the future, but assuming that the future is doing circles, disaster should be somewhere in the future. So we have to be vigilant, we have to deploy resilience, enhance more the reforms, and let's say, don't rest, be always alerted. Because Greeks, me including, we have the tendency to relax, so we shouldn't.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good point on the infrastructure, which in terms of being a very important driver of long-term growth and obviously critical for the investment landscape. I think maybe we could have discussed even more the infrastructure, investment in infrastructure. But thanks for that. Just to take all of you just one, max 1 minute now to come back on this question of is it now harder or easier in terms of the direction of travel and what still needs to be done? Are there still any, what you would say are quick gains or easy gains in terms of red tape or regulation or what? So,
challenges are always hard. It's a very good thing that collecting taxes is not now part of Greece's problem, is part of the solution. And of course, we've not solved everything, but we've set course for the right destination. There are many challenges ahead. Expectations differ. They become stronger sometimes. So you need to match simplification with fair audits. You need to match speed with efficiency. And I would say for us, big titles is how we reshape our organization now, going away from old-fashioned models of local competences and restrictions that would not allow us to be more efficient. Digitalization allows us now for an auditor in Athens to audit a company in Thessaloniki, and for an agent that is based in Heraklion to answer a question to a taxpayer in Patra. So this is how we need to organize ourselves. The other big question is how we deal with AI that is coming and is going to affect everybody. Not want to take over the other speaker's time. I would say there are new challenges ahead, but I'm optimistic if we managed to succeed in what was conceived as more or less as impossible in the previous years. I think we have the capacity to succeed in the rest.
Yeah, thanks. George, if you had to identify a priority, just one, how would you see it?
I would say we need to constantly upgrade the quality of our labor force in terms of constant upskilling and reskilling in a world that is changing rapidly. So some of the areas that we thought 5-10 years ago were the cutting edge of where jobs will be created are now pointing to different areas. They are already defunct. And in a way, going back to your previous question, Joan, it's easier and harder. It's harder to reduce the unemployment rate from 8.5 to 6% than it is to take it down from 18%. And it's harder to raise the employment rate as we are today than it was when the unemployment rate was higher. As in the diet. But in our case, we are not postponing it to Monday, which is a very important element. But it's also easier because we don't have to fight with a negative stereotype of trying to rebrand Greece in a positive way, as the country needed to do several years ago. And we're also riding on the coattails and the results and the structural transformation that has already happened as a result of the investment that has taken place over the last few years, whose productivity benefits are to be seen down the road.
Okay, same question for you then, Colin, to finish off. 1 minute, and it'll be 25 minutes past, and we'll have done our job good.
I mean, I've already talked about the labour market, right? And I think that's where I would focus. And I just want to emphasise, it's because Greece has regained its credibility. And investors now don't differentiate Greece from the rest of Europe in the way that they used to in the past. So investment flows are good, FDI flows are good. There is more to be done. There is always more to be done. It's when you look at things like product market regulation or labour market flexibility, beating the average is nice, but actually matching the Netherlands in some of those measures would probably be even better. So there's always scope to do more stuff. And just on the point about is it more difficult or easier, I mean, the standard question there is most of the time governments do the easy stuff first, the low-hanging fruit. But actually I think scale and scope of changes, not kind of individual measures, but the whole gamut of what has been achieved across the economy over the past 10 years, and particularly the last 7 or 8 years, that should be incredibly positive because it gives the Greek people confidence that their government can set long-term plans. It gives investors confidence that the Greek government is not going to volte-face and turn around and do something different. And to the point that George made, if Greece is becoming this more dynamic, more flexible economy, predicting exactly where to put the money is the wrong game because things will shift and things will change. It's about equipping the economy to adjust to those shocks.